The wind carried the smell of rain long before the first drops touched the earth. Dark clouds pressed low over the land as if the sky itself were holding its breath. It was the kind of silence that made even birds go quiet, a silence that seemed wrong, heavy, waiting. For generations, people had lived here without ever asking why certain ground was left untouched. They built their homes, raised their families, worked the fields, but they avoided that one stretch of land, that scar of soil that ran like a black seam through the valley. No one planted there. No one dug too deep. Stories passed down in whispers spoke of a warning, but the warning was so old it had turned into superstition. And like all old superstitions, it was ignored by those who thought themselves wiser. Tonight, though, the silence felt sharper, almost alive. At the edge of that forbidden land stood a man staring into the distance. His clothes were worn from labor, his hands calloused, his face drawn with years of worry. He hadn't meant to stop here. He was simply walking home before the storm, but something had pulled him closer. His feet crunched over gravel and the sound seemed far too loud. He could feel the soil under him, loose, brittle, different from the fields he had worked his whole life. He remembered the stories his grandfather used to tell, stories about what humanity had hidden long ago. A secret so vast it was never written down, only spoken in whispers, always ending with the same warning: if the earth stirs, do not be near. As a child he had laughed at those words. Now standing there he couldn't laugh at all. Far beneath the ground something shifted. It wasn't an earthquake, not the kind that rattles windows or shakes walls. This was softer, slower, like the faint rolling of something ancient turning in its sleep. The man froze, his breath caught in his throat. For a moment, he thought he had imagined it, until the soil beneath his boots pulsed, ever so slightly, as if the earth itself had a heartbeat. Fear gripped him, sharp and sudden. He backed away, but his eyes wouldn't leave the ground. He felt small, powerless, like a child again listening to his grandfather's voice. He wanted to run, but some part of him knew it was already too late. Miles away, deep in the control rooms of old government bunkers long since decommissioned, lights flickered to life for the first time in centuries. Dust fell from long-dead machinery as ancient sensors awoke. Monitors lit up with warnings in languages barely remembered, words written by men who had sworn never to speak of what they had done. Red indicators flashed one after another, silent alarms in places no one alive even knew existed. Humanity had buried something. Humanity had sworn never to touch it. But now, something beneath the soil was stirring. In a quiet farmhouse on the other side of the valley, a woman sat by the window watching the storm roll in. She was tired, her hands rough from years of work, but her eyes were sharp, restless. She had grown up hearing the same old stories about the cursed land, and like everyone else she had dismissed them. But lately she had noticed things. Small tremors in the night, her animals restless without cause, the air thick with a strange unease. She hadn't told anyone yet. People would only laugh or worse, accuse her of being fearful. But tonight, as the first drops of rain hit the window, she felt something different. The sound was wrong, hollow, as if the ground itself resisted the storm. She pressed her palm against the glass and whispered, not to anyone but to herself, "Something's waking up." By midnight the storm had broken. Lightning split the sky, thunder rolled across the valley, and the soil in that forbidden stretch of land began to crack. Thin lines opened across the ground, releasing air that had not touched the surface in countless generations. It carried a smell, sharp, metallic, burning with a taste that did not belong to nature. Animals fled in every direction. Dogs barked wildly. Horses reared in their stalls. Even the insects vanished from the fields. The world itself seemed to recoil. And yet, humanity had no idea what truly lay beneath. Long before anyone alive was born, before any of their wars or victories, the ancestors had fought a battle so desperate it had nearly ended them. The world they inherited was peaceful only because something had been locked away. They had buried it beneath the soil, not out of mercy but out of terror. They had written no record, built no monuments because they knew the greatest threat was memory itself. If anyone remembered, if anyone grew curious enough to dig, then all their sacrifice would be wasted. But the earth does not keep secrets forever. The man who had stood at the edge of the land did not sleep that night. He sat awake in his small house, staring at his hands, wondering why he felt as if they were stained with something invisible. Every creak of the floorboards made him jump. Every gust of wind rattling the shutters set his heart racing. He knew what he had felt, the pulse of the earth, and it would not leave his mind. The woman in the farmhouse barely slept either. She dreamed of deep caverns filled with shadows, of voices whispering from under the ground, voices that were not human. She woke with her chest tight and her mouth dry, the storm still raging outside. She told herself it was just fear, just the weather, but the unease refused to fade. By dawn, the cracks in the soil had widened. Small streams of black dust rose into the air, carried by the wind, invisible to most eyes. The earth was opening, not in violence but in patience, like a mouth slowly preparing to speak. And beneath it all, something was listening. The old sensors continued their work, sending warnings to places no one would ever receive them. Ancient code triggered dormant systems designed not to protect but to contain. But containment was failing. The locks were old, the seals weakened, and the weight of centuries had thinned the barriers that were never meant to last this long. What slept beneath the soil had waited in silence. It had felt the weight of time, the tremors of generations above. It had listened to the endless heartbeat of humanity walking the surface, living, dying, forgetting. It had waited for this moment, not because it was forced but because it chose to. The wrath of humanity was not gone. It was not lost. It was only sleeping. And now something was calling it back. The storm ended with a sudden stillness, the kind that comes after lightning has burned itself out. The valley lay soaked, the fields flooded, and the cracks in the forbidden ground glistened with rainwater. The man stood at his door, staring toward that dark line of earth. The woman did the same from her farmhouse window. Neither of them knew why they couldn't look away. Neither of them realized their lives had already changed. Because far beneath their feet, something ancient opened its eyes. And the soil trembled. The cracks in the earth were small at first, thin lines only noticeable to those who walked close. But by the second day they spread wider, breaking patterns into the ground like veins in stone. The soil was loose, dry, and darker than it should have been, as if it carried a memory of fire. The man returned to the edge of the forbidden land, though every part of him wanted to stay away. He couldn't explain it, but something pulled him back. His boots sank into the damp earth as he stepped closer. He crouched down, running his fingers over the strange dust that rose from the cracks. It left his fingertips black, and when he rubbed them together, the grit was finer than ash. It burned faintly against his skin, a sensation so subtle he almost thought it was imagined. His chest tightened with unease. He whispered to himself just to break the silence, "What have we done?" But he knew the truth, he had done nothing. This was older than him, older than anyone alive. Something buried by hands long gone. Something left behind, not forgotten by the earth. The woman in the farmhouse felt the same pull. She walked to her barn in the early morning light, her animals restless, their eyes wide and shining. They refused to go near the edge of the field. She tried leading one of her horses out, but it pulled away, nearly breaking free from the rope. She whispered comfort to it, but the trembling never stopped. Even the dogs wouldn't bark that way, only growl low and deep when the wind shifted toward that cursed ground. She paused at the fence, her eyes drawn to the horizon. The cracks were visible even from here, dark lines crawling out like roots seeking air. The sight filled her with a cold dread. She told herself she should stay away, she should not watch, not care. But she couldn't stop. Some part of her knew that whatever was waking beneath the soil was not just a problem for the land. It was a problem for all of them. Far beneath their feet, the stirring grew stronger. The old systems that had been built to contain it faltered. Rusted metal gave way, seals crumbled under pressure. Monitors, buried in silence for centuries, blinked and dimmed as their power waned. Machines hummed weakly like dying lungs, their purpose forgotten. They had been designed to protect, to warn, to keep humanity safe from itself. But no one remembered how to maintain them. No one even remembered they were there. And so, the burden of silence stretched too long and the cracks widened. In the valley town, whispers began. People noticed the restless animals, the strange dust carried by the wind, the sharp smell in the air. Children complained of nightmares, waking in the night screaming of shadows and voices underground. Elders grew quiet, avoiding questions, their faces pale as if they remembered something they wished they didn't. One night, the woman dreamed again. She found herself standing in a cavern so vast she could not see the ceiling. The walls pulsed with faint light, a glow that shifted like breath. She felt the presence of something around her, something immense, coiled, patient. A whisper reached her, not in words she understood, but in meaning. It spoke of wrath, of fire, of battles fought long ago in darkness. She woke with tears in her eyes, her chest aching as though she had been running. She lit a lantern and walked to her window. The forbidden land lay silent in the moonlight, cracks gleaming like scars. She pressed her hand against the glass. "We should have left it alone," she whispered, though she didn't know who she meant by we. The man too could not sleep. He sat at his table, a single candle burning low. His grandfather's words returned to him sharper than ever. If the earth stirs, do not be near. He thought about leaving, packing what little he had and walking away from the valley. But where could he go? This was his home. His family's bones were buried in the soil, their sweat in the fields. Running would not change what was waking. And deep down he felt a terrible truth: if it was stirring now, then it was already too late. By the end of the week, the cracks had spread far. Farmers found their fields split. Wells ran black with dust instead of water. Livestock refused to graze, their ribs showing from hunger. Even the plants withered where the strange dust touched them. The valley began to change. The air grew heavier, pressing down on lungs. The night stretched long, filled with sounds that could not be named. The people tried to carry on, but fear crept into their voices. Conversations grew hushed, glances wary. The town elders held a meeting, but their words were empty. They told everyone not to worry, not to stir panic. But their eyes betrayed them. They were afraid, more afraid than they admitted. The woman attended the meeting. She stood in the back, her arms crossed, listening to the hollow reassurances. She could feel anger rising in her chest. How could they pretend not to see? How could they ignore what was happening in plain sight? When she finally spoke, her voice carried across the room. You all know what's happening. You've seen it? Felt it? The ground is breaking and it's not stopping. Something is moving under there. Murmurs swept the room. The elders frowned, but none could deny her words. The silence after she spoke was heavier than the storm outside. The man stood too, his voice shaking but firm. I felt it. The earth. It's alive. It's not just stories. For a moment no one spoke. Then one of the elders muttered, We swore never to speak of it. Never. The words hung in the air like a confession. The crowd erupted in confusion, demanding answers. But the elders gave none. They only left, their faces pale, their silence more telling than any truth. After that night the town was never the same. Fear spread faster than the cracks. Families whispered about leaving, but few had the means. Some locked themselves indoors, refusing to speak of it. Others prayed, though they did not know what they prayed to. The soil kept breaking, the dust kept rising, and the valley seemed to hold its breath. The woman began keeping notes of everything she saw. She wrote about the cracks, the animals, the nightmares. She wrote about the silence in the town and the weight in the air. It was all she could do, to record it, to give it form, as though writing it down might make it less terrible. The man tried to work, but the fields yielded nothing. He grew thin, his hands trembling. Yet he still walked to the edge of the forbidden land each day, unable to stop himself. He watched the cracks widen, watched the soil tremble, watched the dust rise like smoke from a hidden fire. And always he felt it, the heartbeat deep below, slow and patient, growing stronger. One evening, as the sun sank behind the mountains, the woman walked to the edge of the land. She found the man already there, standing in silence. They did not speak at first. The earth beneath them was enough, its silence heavy, its presence undeniable. Finally she said, Do you feel it too? He nodded. It's waiting. They stood together, watching the soil split open just a little more. The cracks were no longer random, they formed patterns, curling shapes in the earth like symbols too vast to understand. It was as though the land itself was trying to write something, a message in scars. What do you think it is? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. He swallowed hard. Not what? Who? The word hung in the air, sharp as thunder. Far below, in darkness deeper than any cavern, something shifted again. The seals broke one after another. Pressure filled the space, heavy and suffocating. For the first time in centuries, a low sound rose from the earth. Not a voice, not yet, but a resonance, a vibration that spread upward through the soil, through the cracks, through the valley. The ground trembled beneath their feet. Both the man and woman stumbled, grabbing for balance. The sound grew louder, not through the air but inside their chests, rattling their bones. Their eyes widened as the soil before them shuddered and split wide enough for dust to billow out in thick black clouds. They could not see what lay beneath. Not yet. But they felt it, an awareness, vast and cold, brushing against their thoughts. It was not human. And yet, it carried the weight of humanity within it. A wrath buried, a memory sealed away, now pushing toward the surface. The woman clutched her chest, her breath ragged. It knows us. The man's voice was hoarse. It remembers. The dust swirled, carried by the wind, spreading through the valley. The animals wailed, the air grew thick, and the ground pulsed with life. The earth was no longer just soil. It was a wound opening, a secret unraveling. And whatever humanity had buried there, was waking. The valley no longer felt like the same place. Days stretched long and heavy, filled with a silence that seemed to listen back. Nights were worse. The cracks in the soil glowed faintly now, not with fire but with something deeper, something that pulsed like breath. The animals had all but fled, leaving barns empty, fields quiet. And the people moved through their days with fear in their eyes, speaking less, watching the ground as though it might reach for them at any moment. The man had stopped working the fields altogether. The earth no longer gave crops, only dust. His body was leaner, his eyes hollow, yet his steps always carried him to the edge of that cursed land. He could not stay away. Each day the heartbeat beneath grew louder, more certain, pressing into his chest until he could not tell where his own pulse ended and the soil's began. The woman had taken to recording everything. Her journal was filled with descriptions of the cracks, the dust, the strange lights, the low vibrations that spread through the valley at night. She did not know who would ever read it, but writing was the only way she could keep from falling apart. Her dreams grew darker, showing her things she wished she had never seen. Endless caverns, shapes moving in silence, human faces twisted in agony as though calling from beneath the ground. She woke each night drenched in sweat, whispering prayers that had no words. The town was unraveling. Families left in the dark, wagons packed with what little they could carry, wheels rattling down the mountain road. Others stayed, too poor or too stubborn to flee, clinging to the hope that the earth would quiet again. But no one believed it. The dust was spreading too far, the cracks cutting too deep. Children coughed through the nights, their chests tight with the strange ash that lingered in the air. The elders who once swore silence no longer came out of their homes. Windows stayed shuttered. Doors stayed locked. The valley had become a waiting room for something no one wanted to see. One night, lightning struck the mountains. The thunder shook the valley, and for a heartbeat afterward, the earth responded. It wasn't a tremor. It was a roar. The sound rolled out from beneath the soil, a vibration so deep it rattled bones and shook the breath from lungs. Windows shattered. Lanterns toppled. The man fell to his knees at the edge of the forbidden ground, hands pressed against the dirt as if trying to hold it closed. But it was alive. It was moving. The woman found him there, his face pale in the moonlight, his hands trembling. She dropped to the ground beside him, clutching his arm. "You feel it too," she whispered. He couldn't answer. His jaw clenched, his eyes locked on the cracks that now burned faintly with a dull, steady glow. The dust rose thicker, forming clouds that twisted in the wind. Shapes flickered in the haze, shadows that vanished when you tried to look at them directly. "It's not just the ground," she said, her voice shaking. "It's in us. It's pushing into us." He finally spoke, his voice hoarse. "This isn't nature. This isn't accident. This is what they buried." Her throat tightened. "Then why now? Why wake now?" He didn't answer. Because deep down they both knew the truth. It had always been waiting. Humanity had locked it away, sealed it in silence, but silence cannot hold forever. Centuries had passed, generations had forgotten, but the earth remembered. And now the earth was breaking. The next morning the valley was filled with smoke. Not fire but dust so thick the sun barely pierced it. People stumbled through streets with cloths over their mouths, eyes stinging, voices muffled. The air hummed with a low vibration, constant and unrelenting, like the valley itself was groaning. Rumors spread fast. Some said it was a punishment, others said it was a curse. Some swore they had seen figures standing in the dust, human-shaped but not human at all. Fear turned to anger, and anger turned to blame. Neighbors shouted at each other in the streets, fists clenched, families divided. The valley was no longer united, it was tearing itself apart just as the soil did. The woman tried to speak to the townsfolk, tried to warn them that fleeing might not save them, that the cracks were spreading farther than they could imagine. But few listened. Fear had made them blind. They wanted answers but none could give them. That night the ground split wider. A sound like tearing metal rolled through the valley. Entire sections of soil collapsed inward, leaving gaping wounds in the land. Black air rushed out, carrying a heat that burned the lungs. The people screamed, running from their homes, gathering in the square as if closeness could protect them. The man and woman stood at the edge, watching as the earth opened wider than ever before. The sound came again, louder this time, not just vibration but voice. It wasn't language as they knew it, not words shaped by tongues or lips, but something older, deeper. It was meaning pressed directly into their bones. It carried fury, grief, and memory all at once. It carried humanity itself. The woman covered her ears, though it did nothing. Tears streamed down her face. "It remembers us," she cried. "It's angry." The man staggered back, his heart pounding. "Not angry. waiting. The cracks stretched like veins through the valley, glowing brighter now. Houses crumbled where the ground split. The old church tower tilted, its bell crashing into the street. People wailed, clutching each other as the air shook with sound. And still nothing had risen yet. Nothing had shown itself. Only the soil itself lived, breathing, pulsing, waiting to give birth to whatever humanity had buried there. The woman grabbed the man's arm, her nails digging into his sleeve. If it wakes fully. He cut her off, his voice raw. It is waking. The dust surged higher, blacking out the stars. The valley became a shadow of itself, every outline blurred, every breath heavy with ash. Shapes moved in the haze again, closer now, darker, almost real. Whispers cut through the roar, voices layered one over another. Some were filled with rage. Some with sorrow. All were human and yet not. The people screamed prayers into the night. Some fled, stumbling blindly into the mountains, coughing through the black haze. Others fell to their knees, their faces pressed into the dirt as though surrender might save them. But the ground kept pulsing, the sound kept rising, and the dust kept spreading. The man and woman stood firm at the edge, their bodies trembling, their lungs burning. They could not leave. They would not leave. Because deep in their hearts they knew, this was not something they could run from. This was a reckoning. The soil cracked wide at their feet, opening into a chasm that breathed heat and ash. A glow lit the depths, not fire, not light, but something else, something that felt alive. It pressed against their skin, their hearts, their very thoughts. The man gritted his teeth, staring into the abyss. This is what they feared. This is what they buried. The woman's voice was barely a whisper. And now, it's coming back. The ground shook harder than ever, the dust roaring upward, the glow burning brighter. The valley wailed with the voices of its people, with the cries of animals long gone, with the memory of battles long past. The heartbeat beneath the earth thundered so loud it drowned out everything else. The chasm widened, the soil trembling, the air cracking with force. The earth itself was about to open, about to reveal what it had kept hidden through all the long years of silence. And then, everything stopped. The ground froze mid-shudder. The dust hung suspended in the air. The glow beneath the soil pulsed once, twice, then held steady, brighter than ever. The silence that followed was worse than the roar, worse than the trembling. It was the silence of a breath held, the silence before something breaks free. The man and woman clutched each other, their eyes wide, their hearts pounding as one. Whatever humanity had buried, whatever wrath had waited beneath the soil, was about to rise. The silence held too long. The valley seemed frozen in that suspended breath, the dust hanging, the cracks glowing with a light that was neither fire nor sun. The man's heart pounded so violently he thought it might tear from his chest. The woman's hand was locked on his arm, her nails digging into his skin, but he hardly felt the pain. Both of them stood trembling at the edge, waiting for the earth to finish what it had started. But then something shifted. Not from below, this time it came from above. A low rumble cut through the clouds. The air grew colder, sharper. The woman looked up, her mouth parting in shock. At first it looked like storm clouds thickening, curling into themselves. But the sound wasn't thunder. It was deeper, mechanical, unnatural. Shapes formed high in the sky, black silhouettes blotting out what little light remained. The man narrowed his eyes, his breath catching. That's not the storm. One by one the shapes became clear. Machines. Vast, dark machines that moved like ships, silent but heavy, descending through the clouds. Their edges gleamed faintly, old metal dulled by centuries but still alive with power. They weren't built by the valley's people. They weren't built by anyone alive. The woman shook her head, backing a step away from the chasm. They knew. They always knew. The machines hovered over the cracks, their presence immense, their shadows falling across the trembling earth. Lights flickered along their undersides, scanning beams sweeping over the soil as if measuring, judging. The air hummed louder, resonating with the same deep rhythm as the heartbeat below. The man's voice was hoarse, almost broken. They didn't just bury it. They built guardians. They buried themselves too. The crowd in the valley square panicked. People screamed and pointed at the sky, their voices echoing off the mountains. Some dropped to their knees, believing salvation had come. Others fled, terrified that something worse had arrived. The machines gave no answer. They simply hovered, their low hum blending with the earth's pulse. The woman clutched her journal to her chest. These aren't here to save us. They're here to keep it from leaving. Her words struck him like a blow. Of course. Humanity hadn't trusted silence alone. They hadn't buried their wrath without guardians. These machines were relics of a time no one remembered, of a war that had nearly ended them. They had left behind watchers, silent, waiting, ready to awaken if the soil stirred again. But the machines did not attack. They did not descend further. They circled above, their beams intensifying, scanning the glowing chasm. It was as though they were unsure, as though even they feared what was rising. The woman's voice cracked. If it breaks free, even they can't hold it. The man's eyes stayed fixed on the glow beneath the earth. Then it's not just the valley. It's the whole world. The ground trembled again, harder than before, as though the presence of the machines had angered whatever lay beneath. The glow surged upward, spilling through the cracks like molten veins. The dust rose thicker, swirling violently as if it were alive, clawing toward the sky. The machines responded at last. Their lights flared, beams striking the soil with force. The sound was deafening, like stone grinding against stone, like the air itself tearing. The ground shook violently under the attack, and the valley erupted in screams. Homes collapsed, fields tore apart, people fled in every direction. The woman shielded her face from the blinding light, her journal clutched tight. They're trying to push it back. But the man knew. He felt it in his bones, in the rhythm of his heart that matched the pulse below. The machines weren't pushing it back. They were trying to hold it down. They were fighting not for the valley but for the world beyond it. And the earth resisted. The glow flared brighter, the cracks splitting wider, tearing across the valley floor like lightning bolts. Entire chunks of land fell inward, swallowed by the abyss. The machines fired again, their beams stronger, but the dust only rose higher, wrapping around them like grasping hands. The man and woman stumbled back, the ground opening near their feet. They barely kept their balance, their breaths ragged. The woman's eyes were wide with terror, yet a grim certainty filled her voice. If it breaks free, nothing will stop it. Not them. Not anyone. He turned to her, his face pale, sweat streaking his skin. Then why did they bury it at all? Why not destroy it? She met his gaze, her voice trembling. Because they couldn't. The words rang in the air like a bell. Humanity hadn't chosen silence out of mercy. They had chosen it out of desperation. They had locked away something too powerful to kill, too dangerous to unleash. And now, after centuries of waiting, it was pushing back against its prison. The machines above roared, their engines straining, beams slamming down again and again. The earth split wider, the glow bursting upward in defiance. The dust swallowed more of the valley, twisting into towering columns that looked almost human in shape. Whispers cut through the noise, voices layered upon voices, each one carrying fragments of memory, rage, grief, vengeance. The woman clutched the man's arm. Her voice was raw, desperate. It's not just wrath. It's them. It's all of them. He stared at her, confusion burning through his fear. What do you mean? She shook her head, tears running down her face. It's not a weapon. It's what they became. What they turned themselves into. The truth hit like a blow. This wasn't just humanity's wrath. This was humanity itself, twisted, remade, buried deep so their children could forget. They hadn't locked away a monster. They had locked away what they themselves had become to survive a war no one alive could remember. The ground roared again, the heartbeat louder, stronger, unstoppable. The machines strained overhead, their lights dimming under the force of the rising glow. The people in the valley screamed, their voices lost in the storm of dust and sound. The man and woman stood at the edge, their bodies trembling, their hearts pounding. The truth weighed heavy in their chests. What was waking beneath the soil wasn't just a secret. It was humanity's final form. And it wanted out. The roar of the valley became unbearable. The earth no longer trembled, it tore itself apart. The cracks widened into canyons, swallowing entire homes, dragging the fields into a glowing abyss. The air was thick with ash and dust, choking every breath. The machines above fought desperately, their beams cutting through the storm, but it wasn't enough. The buried force was rising, and nothing seemed capable of stopping it. The man gripped the woman's hand as they staggered back, their bodies battered by the wind. He felt her nails cutting into his palm, but neither let go. They both knew this was the moment. Whatever came next would decide everything. The glow erupted upward in a violent surge, not light but something heavier, something alive. It poured into the sky like liquid fire, coiling, twisting, forming shapes too vast to comprehend. The storm of dust bent around it, almost bowing as if the very air knew what had returned. Voices filled the valley. Not one, not many, countless. They rose as a chorus, an ocean of sound that pressed against the ears and the heart alike. Grief, rage, pride, and sorrow swelled in every note. The woman's face was wet with tears. She clutched the journal to her chest, shaking her head as if refusing to believe what she had already written. "It's them," she whispered, broken. "All of them. They never left. They became this." The man felt his chest tighten, his breath failing. The secret humanity had buried was not a weapon, not a curse. It was their ancestors themselves, fused into one will, one storm of fury, too dangerous to walk the earth again. They had sacrificed their humanity to protect their children from a war that no longer had a name. The machines struck harder, beams blazing brighter than the sun, cutting through the clouds as they tried to cage the rising force. But the glow pushed back, bending the beams, twisting them, consuming the light as though it were nothing. One of the great machines groaned, its massive frame splitting apart before crashing into the valley floor. The ground shook so hard that both the man and woman were thrown down, their fingers still clinging together. The storm of voices lowered suddenly as if focusing. A single word echoed through the valley, sharp, cold, undeniable. "Children." The man's heart froze. The word was not in any known language, yet he understood it. So did she. The storm was not mindless. Remembered. It recognized. The woman pushed herself to her knees, her voice hoarse as she shouted into the storm. "We're not your children anymore. We built our own lives. You can't take them back." The storm shuddered, its glow flaring brighter, waves of heat rushing outward. The voices rose, filled with anger and sorrow alike. The machines answered with another barrage, their beams crashing into the heart of the glow, but the storm only grew stronger. The man staggered to his feet, pulling her with him. His voice cracked as he screamed into the storm, his throat raw with desperation. "You buried yourself so we could live. You chose silence. Don't take it back now." The ground split wider, the glow rising higher, almost touching the hovering machines. The storm twisted into something more solid, shapes like human forms, towering, faceless, reaching toward the sky. The air itself seemed ready to shatter. Then for the first time the storm hesitated. The voices lowered again, not in rage but in something else, something almost mournful. The glow dimmed slightly, flickering, uncertain. The woman's tears streamed down her face as she clutched her journal. She opened it, pages whipping violently in the storm until she pressed one against her chest and screamed into the dust. "You wanted us to remember. That's why you left it here. That's why you couldn't destroy yourselves. You didn't want us to become you. You wanted us to choose differently." The storm shivered, 1,000 voices breaking into fragments. Some wailed. Some raged. Some whispered as if pleading. The glow flared again, the ground cracking further, but it was no longer steady, it was torn, divided. The man raised his voice over the chaos, his words raw with everything he had left. "We're not here to repeat you. We're here to honor you. Let us live free. Let us carry you forward in memory, not in chains." The storm surged once more, violent, blinding, as though all of humanity's past was ripping itself in two. The machines fired one last desperate volley, beams crashing down with earth-shaking force. For a heartbeat, the world was pure light and sound, unbearable, infinite. Then silence. The glow collapsed inward, sucked back into the cracks like water draining into the earth. The storm of dust fell all at once, covering the valley in thick, choking stillness. The machines above hung silent, their lights dim, engines struggling to hold them in the air. The people scattered across the valley began to rise slowly, their sobs and gasps breaking the silence. The man and woman clung to each other, coughing, trembling, unable to speak. The chasm glowed faintly, softer now, as though the wrath had been pressed back into the earth. For a moment, it seemed the secret was buried once more. But then came the twist. The woman's journal, still in her hands, grew hot. She cried out, dropping it, the pages bursting into flame without burning. The fire twisted upward, forming letters in the air before vanishing. The words were simple. Not ended. Chosen. The man stared at the fading letters, his breath shallow. The woman shook her head, her lips trembling. They didn't just return to silence, they gave it to us. The choice. They passed it on. The glow beneath the ground pulsed once, faint but steady, like a heartbeat retreating but never gone. The machines above turned slowly, their lights flickering before fading back into the clouds, leaving the valley scarred but alive. The people would tell themselves it was over, that the wrath had been stopped, that the Watchers had won. But the man and woman knew the truth. It had not been defeated. It had been inherited. The storm was no longer only beneath the earth. A piece of it had been left behind, not in the soil, not in the machines, but in them. In their blood, in their choices. Humanity's final form had given its children what it never could give itself. freedom to decide what came next. The man squeezed the woman's hand, both of them shaking, tears and ash streaking their faces. The valley was broken but alive. The secret was no longer buried. It lived in them now, waiting, watching. And for the first time, the silence of the valley felt heavier than ever. The valley was quiet for the first time in days. The smoke had thinned, leaving behind the smell of burnt earth and stone. People wandered like shadows among the ruins, their clothes torn, their faces smeared with ash, their eyes searching for something that wasn't there. The machines had gone, drifting back into the clouds until the sky swallowed them, leaving no trace. What remained was only the scar in the ground, a wound still glowing faintly, like the last embers of a dying fire. The man and the woman sat side by side on the broken edge of the chasm. Their hands were still linked, though neither had noticed until they looked down at their trembling fingers. She closed the journal, its charred cover still warm, and pulled it against her chest. He leaned forward, staring into the depth below, where the glow pulsed weakly, like a heartbeat that would never stop. For a long time neither spoke. They just listened. The valley seemed to breathe differently now. Every gust of wind carried a weight to it, as if the soil itself remembered. Finally she broke the silence. Her voice was small but steady. "It didn't die," she whispered. "It didn't want to." He nodded slowly. His throat was tight, words catching before they could form. "No, it gave itself to us." The journal trembled in her hands as though agreeing. The memory of the fire-written words burned still in both of their minds. Asterisk not ended. Chosen, asterisk. Others began to gather near them, drawn to the place where it had all ended, or begun. Some knelt, pressing their palms to the soil as though to feel the pulse. Others turned away, frightened, whispering prayers or curses under their breath. No one could agree on what had truly happened. Some said the Watchers saved them. Others swore the storm of voices had been a punishment for what humanity had forgotten. But the man and woman knew. They had seen the faces in the light, heard the word children in their bones. Humanity's wrath was not a curse, it was a choice left behind, buried until the day it was awakened. The soil had only hidden it. The blood of their ancestors had become the soil itself. As the days passed, the survivors rebuilt what they could. Shelters were raised from the wreckage, fires lit in the night to remind them they were still alive. The machines above did not return. The silence in the sky was both a comfort and a threat, as though the Watchers were waiting to see what humanity would do now. The woman wrote endlessly in her journal. Every detail, every voice, every flicker of light that had torn the earth apart. She wrote with shaking hands, but she wrote. "If we forget," she said one night, staring into the flames, "then they'll rise again. That's why they left us the choice. To remember. Or to fall." The man stayed by her side. He helped build, helped dig, helped carry the weight of silence that seemed heavier each morning. He didn't know what to say most of the time, but he knew the truth of her words. Forgetting was more dangerous than remembering. One night, as the stars burned brighter than usual above the scarred valley, he asked the question that had lived in his chest since the storm had vanished. "What if we make the wrong choice?" She looked at him, her face lined with exhaustion but her eyes steady. "Then we become them. And someone else will have to rise against us. That's the risk of being human." Her words stayed with him. They were heavier than the soil, heavier than the silence. But they were true. Humanity had been given no gift, no weapon, only responsibility. The wrath beneath the soil was not gone, it was now inside every person who had stood there that day. Seasons shifted. The valley began to heal. Grass pushed timidly through the cracks, and water pooled at the bottom of the chasm, glowing faintly as though touched by memory. Children played near the edge, their laughter cautious at first, then bolder, as if daring the earth to remember. The people told stories to them, of fire, of voices, of the choice left behind. They told them with fear but also with pride. The man and woman grew older but they stayed. They became keepers of the scar, the ones who carried the truth when others chose only fragments. Travelers came from far places to ask about the awakening, to hear what had really been found beneath the soil. Some believed. Some laughed. But all left changed, as if the weight of the words clung to them whether they wanted it or not. On the final day, when his hair was gray and his strength failing, the man walked to the chasm alone. The soil was warm beneath his feet. The pulse was still there, soft but unending. He leaned down, pressed his hand to the ground and closed his eyes. In the silence he thought he heard them again, the voices not angry now, not demanding but waiting. Waiting for what humanity would do with the choice it had been given. He whispered into the earth. "We're trying. That's all we can promise." The glow flickered faintly beneath his hand, then steadied as if answering. He smiled through his tears. When he returned to the village, the woman was waiting with the journal. She placed it in his lap, its pages thick with years of words, with a lifetime of memory. "It's not ours anymore," she said softly. "It belongs to them now. To the ones who'll come after." And so they passed it on. The valley remained scarred, but it was no longer feared. It became a place of pilgrimage, a reminder written not in stone, but in soil and silence. The people called it the Heart of Wrath, though not in anger. It was a reminder that humanity's greatest secret had not been its strength or its weapons, but its ability to choose. Generations later, the story was still told. Around fires, in homes, on the road, whispered in the ears of children who asked why the ground sometimes trembled in their dreams. And though the story changed with each voice, one truth remained unbroken. Beneath the soil, humanity's wrath had waited, but it had not been buried forever. It lived on in every choice, in every hand that built or destroyed, in every memory carried forward. The watchers never came back. Perhaps they were satisfied. Perhaps they were afraid. No one knew. But the sky remained open, the earth steady, and humanity alive. And in the quiet of night, when the wind bent low across the valley and the soil hummed faintly with its hidden pulse, people would close their eyes and remember. The wrath was not ended. It was chosen. And the choice always was theirs. Thank you for staying with me through this story. Beneath the soil, humanity's wrath waited reminds us of something deeper. That the greatest power we carry isn't buried in the earth, but in the choices we make every day. This tale spoke to you. Stay tuned. There are more HFY stories coming, each one exploring what makes humanity stand apart when the galaxy least expects it. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe if you'd like to walk with me through the next journey. And as always, remember, the story of humanity isn't finished. The next choice is ours.